The brass band was mid-note when the gun went off. The sound ripped through the parade field, cutting clean through the anthem and into the spine of everyone standing at attention. For a moment, the world didn't breathe. The flags froze mid-sway. The smell of gunpowder replaced the scent of sun and grass. Lieutenant Claire Donovan felt the sting before she heard herself gasp. Her right arm burned, blood soaking through the sleeve of her brand-new uniform. She turned, dazed, and saw him. Charles Donovan, her stepfather. Standing among the rows of folding chairs, coat half open, hands still gripping the gun, eyes wild with something older than rage. Envy. "You think wearing that costume makes you one of them?" he shouted. The crowd erupted. Screams, scrambling feet, the dull thud of boots pounding earth. The general beside her, General Robert McAllister, moved faster than anyone expected. He grabbed her shoulder, shoved her down, drew his own sidearm, and bellowed, "Put him down!" Security swarmed. The brass band's instruments hit the ground with metallic clatter. Reporters ducked. The flags flapped madly in the wind. And through the chaos, Claire saw her mother, pale, frozen, standing at the back of the crowd with her hands over her mouth. When the MPs finally wrestled Charles to the ground, his voice kept cutting through the air like a broken speaker. "That medal belongs to a real soldier. She's just pretending to be her father's daughter." He was dragged away, shouting until the car door slammed. The band had stopped playing. The field smelled like brass, sweat, and shame. The cadets didn't know whether to move or salute. Claire pressed a hand to her wound, the blood still warm beneath her fingers. McAllister crouched beside her. "Stay still, Lieutenant. You're hit, but it's clean. You're safe." She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "That man—" "I know who he is," McAllister said grimly. "And so did your father." For a heartbeat, she didn't understand what he meant. Then the words landed. Heavy, deliberate. McAllister's eyes weren't just pitying. They were remembering. Later, the ceremony field was empty except for the military police and a few officers packing up the chaos. Claire sat on a stretcher, arm bandaged, uniform torn, the Medal of Valor still pinned to her chest, her father's medal. Reporters lingered behind the police tape. Cameras clicked, microphones thrust forward. "Lieutenant Donovan, who was the shooter? Was it your stepfather? Did he have a history of violence?" She looked at them, her face pale but composed. "His name is Charles Donovan," she said evenly, "and he's the reason I learned to stand tall." Then she turned her head away from the flashbulbs. McAllister's voice broke through the noise. "That's enough for today." The crowd went quiet. He walked to the microphone still set up for the ceremony. His tone carried the weight of command and fury barely contained. "Lieutenant Shaw Donovan earned her commission through discipline and service. Today she bled for it. The Army stands with her, and with every soldier who's ever had to earn family twice." The silence that followed wasn't just respect. It was outrage turned into reverence. Cameras captured the moment, her blood-stained sleeve, the general's salute, the flag whipping behind them. That image would circle the nation before nightfall. In the ambulance, Claire stared at the ceiling, white, humming, sterile. Her mother sat beside her, shaking. "I didn't know he'd come," she whispered. "He said he just wanted to watch." Claire closed her eyes. "You never knew what he wanted, only what he feared." Her mother's hand trembled against hers. "He was jealous." "I know," Claire said softly. "That's why I kept showing up anyway." The medic interrupted gently, checking her pulse. "You're lucky, Lieutenant. The bullet grazed muscle, missed the bone by half an inch." Claire gave a small, bitter smile. Half an inch is all a soldier ever needs. That night, every major news channel replayed the footage. Commissioning day shooting, stepfather attacks officer daughter. Clips looped endlessly, the shot, the panic, the blood. But one image held longer than the rest. The general, standing between her and the threat, his uniform streaked with her blood, his hand in salute. The caption read, "Honor under fire." In the hospital, Claire refused to give interviews. She told the nurse to turn off the television, the phone, the noise. McAllister visited at dawn. He stood at her bedside, the Medal of Valor box in his hand. "I was supposed to pin this after the ceremony," he said. We didn't get the chance. She nodded faintly. I already have the scar. That should count. He smiled. Scars always count. But this, he opened the box. This belonged to your father, Major Edward Shaw. She froze. You knew him? I served with him, McAllister said quietly. Afghanistan. '03. He saved my life. The air thickened between them. The connection, the circle neither of them had known existed until blood completed it. I was ordered to present this medal to him posthumously, McAllister continued. Now I know why I was meant to give it to you. Claire's throat tightened. He'd have told me to keep my head high. The general nodded. And your aim steady. For the first time since the gunfire, she smiled. As McAllister turned to leave, he paused at the door. You'll hear noise. Let them talk. But when the cameras fade, remember this. Honor doesn't need defending. Just proving. I understand, sir. He looked back once. You proved it today. By morning, the footage had gone viral. Headlines screamed, Lieutenant survives family shooting. But behind the salutes and sympathy, a deeper truth waited. The kind that no medal could shield her from. By the next morning, her name was everywhere. Lieutenant Claire Donovan, daughter of fallen hero Major Edward Shaw, survives shooting by stepfather. The words ran beneath her hospital photo, her face pale, her sleeve crimson. The wound in her arm was stitched and bandaged, but the wound in her name was open season. Cameras waited outside the military hospital. The Army's public affairs officer left her a phone she never touched. Every headline, every opinion show, every whisper tried to turn her life into theater. Is the Army exploiting a tragedy? Was the shooter mentally unstable or just jealous? Should the commissioning ceremony have continued? The world had opinions about her pain, and not one of them asked if she was all right. Asked if her mother came that afternoon. She looked smaller than Claire remembered, as if years of silence had finally collapsed in on themselves. Her eyes were red, her hair messy, her blouse still streaked with blood from when she'd tried to stop the bleeding. Claire! Her voice broke halfway through the name. Claire stared at her for a moment, unsure which emotion to reach for first. Anger, pity, or exhaustion. Finally, she said, You should be at home. Her mother flinched. It doesn't feel like home anymore. Claire looked at the window. Gray sky, heavy clouds pressing down like the air before a storm. It never was, she said quietly. Her mother's breath trembled. He said you'd never forgive me. Claire looked at her, eyes steady, voice steady. I already did. That's how I made it here. Her mother broke down then, not with drama, not loud, just quietly like the release of something that had been dying for years. And in that silence, Claire realized forgiveness didn't sound like peace. It sounded like surrender finally losing its voice. That night, General McAllister came back. He wasn't wearing his full dress uniform this time, just fatigues and a worn army jacket with the same emblem her father once wore. He stood at the foot of her bed, holding a manila envelope. These are the internal statements and footage copies. Thought you might want the record clean before it spreads any more lies? Claire nodded. Thank you, sir. He hesitated. You know, when your father and I served together, he used to talk about you. She blinked. I was 9. He smiled. He said you used to draw soldiers and call them sky heroes. He wanted you to know they were human before you grew up and tried to become one. Her throat tightened. He didn't live long enough to see me try. McAllister shook his head. He didn't need to. Men like him die knowing the right people will carry the weight. He turned toward the door, then paused. The Army can't undo what happened yesterday, he said quietly, but it can show the country what courage looks like when it bleeds and stands anyway. When he left, Claire opened the envelope. Inside were 2 photos. One of her from the ceremony, one of her father in the field, both saluting. The resemblance was eerie. Same eyes, same stillness, same defiance that wasn't loud, but immovable. She laid the photos side by side on the tray table. The bandages on her arm itched under the sterile light. She whispered to the empty room, You said I'd never be one of them, Charles. But I was born from one of them. 2 days later, she was cleared to stand. Her wound wasn't deep enough to keep her in bed, and her pride refused to keep her down. When she stepped into the hallway, the other patients, wounded soldiers, amputees, men in wheelchairs, stopped what they were doing. One man, face-lined and body half metal, saluted her from across the corridor. She returned it. No words, just two soldiers acknowledging each other's quiet war. Outside, a crowd had gathered beyond the gates. Civilians, cadets, families, reporters. When she emerged, flashbulbs flared like artillery fire. A reporter shouted, "Lieutenant Donovan, how does it feel to be a national hero?" She stopped walking, turned toward the camera, and spoke into the storm of lenses. "I'm not a hero, I'm a soldier. My father died in service, and I nearly did the same. But for different reasons. If you want a headline, print this. Family ends where honor begins." The noise stopped. Just for a heartbeat. Even microphones understand when truth outranks spectacle. Back inside, her mother waited by the nurse's station. "Was that necessary?" she asked, voice thin. "Yes," Claire said. "For him. And for me." Her mother lowered her gaze. "He's facing trial next month. Attempted murder, weapons charge." Claire cut in softly. "He'll face himself long before he faces court." Her mother nodded, lips trembling. "He wasn't always like this." Claire's eyes softened. "Neither were you." She took her mother's hand, and the first time in years, and held it. The warmth wasn't forgiveness exactly, more like remembrance that once, before control and fear, love had lived there. That evening, when the hospital quieted, Claire stood before the mirror in her patient blues. She touched the bandage on her arm, then the metal resting on the bedside table. Her reflection looked older than 25. Not from age, but from clarity. She spoke to the mirror, softly, almost to herself. "I didn't survive to prove him wrong. I survived to prove my father right." The words felt like a vow, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken again. The trial was a month away. But before the verdict came, the general called her to headquarters. The Army wanted to make a statement, not about the shooting, but about what honor looks like when the uniform bleeds. The summons came in a plain white envelope. No crest, no rank markings, just her name written in crisp, deliberate handwriting, Lieutenant Claire Donovan, requested at Pentagon HQ. Her pulse quickened as she read it. Not fear, not pride, something in between. The kind of feeling soldiers get before they're told the truth might finally matter. By dawn, she was on a flight to D.C., her uniform pressed, her arm wrapped but functional. She stared out the window the whole way, watching the clouds drift by like silent witnesses. Below her, the world kept spinning, and somewhere, a courtroom waited for the man who had almost stolen her father's name again. At the Pentagon, she was led into a briefing room. General McAllister stood at the head of the table, his jacket folded over the chair, sleeves rolled up. Across from him, several officers in dress blues and one civilian, a press liaison. He turned when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant," he said, "take a seat." She sat. Her palms were steady, her gaze forward. McAllister nodded toward the others. "You've become the face of the story, whether you like it or not. The footage has been viewed over 200 million times. The country doesn't see a tragedy. They see a question. What kind of strength survives betrayal that close to home?" Claire didn't answer. The civilian spoke next. "We'd like to hold a public statement next week. You don't have to say much. Just reaffirm that the Army stands by its values." Claire's eyes flicked toward the general. "And what values are those, sir?" McAllister didn't hesitate. "Honor, restraint, service. Even when it's personal?" she asked, "especially when it's personal." Silence settled for a moment. Then McAllister leaned forward. "There's another reason you're here. The medal you were awarded, your father's, was originally classified under a special citation. We've since declassified it. There's something you should see." He opened a folder and slid it toward her. Inside was a photo. A younger McAllister, her father beside him, dust and sun and exhaustion on their faces. The caption read, "Operation Talon Ridge 2003. She frowned. "You served together?" He nodded. "Your father saved 12 men that day. I was one of them. He ran into enemy fire after I was pinned under a collapsed truck. I told him to fall back." Claire swallowed. "He didn't." McAllister's voice dropped. "No, he said, If my kid ever puts on this uniform, I want her to know what it's for. Her throat tightened. He said that? He did, McAllister said. And now you've shown the country exactly what he meant. The press liaison cleared her throat softly. General, should we include this detail in the public release? McAllister shook his head. No, it's not for headlines, it's for her. Claire looked down at the photo again. Her father's tired smile, the dirt on his cheek, the medal now resting on her own chest. She realized something she hadn't before. Her father's story hadn't ended in the field. It had just gone quiet until she walked onto that parade ground. After the meeting, McAllister walked her to the corridor. The walls were lined with portraits of commanders and heroes, all staring down in stoic judgment. Sir, she said quietly, you knew he was my father this whole time? I suspected, McAllister said. Didn't confirm it until the day of your commissioning. Why didn't you tell me? He looked at her, eyes steady. Because I needed to see if you could carry the name without hiding behind it. Claire exhaled, the truth landing like gravity. I don't know if I carried it well. McAllister smiled faintly. You carried it bleeding. That's more than most ever do. Back in her hotel that night, she replayed his words. The city hummed beyond the window, neon and sirens, the steady drone of people trying to make their own noise loud enough to feel alive. She took off her jacket, unpinned the Medal of Valor, and set it on the desk. It gleamed under the lamplight, cold but alive. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but instinct told her otherwise. When she answered, the voice on the other end was familiar. Brittle, weak, but unmistakably his. Claire. She froze. Charles. He sounded smaller, older. The swagger gone. They let me make one call before sentencing. Her heartbeat drummed in her ears. Why call me? Because I wanted you to hear it from me before the world does. Hear what? That I lost, he said simply. And that you were never mine to break. Her throat went dry. I saw the footage, he said. The general, the flag, the way you stood even bleeding. I thought I hated you for what you represented. Turns out I just hated myself for what I wasn't. Claire gripped the phone tighter. It's too late for sorry. I know, he said, but not too late for truth. The line clicked, dead. She stood there for a long time, phone still in hand, the city pulsing beyond the glass. It wasn't forgiveness that filled the room. It was release, the kind that comes when ghosts finally stop shouting. 2 days later, the Army's official statement aired. No dramatics, no spin. Just General McAllister and Lieutenant Donovan standing side by side before the press. He spoke first. Service isn't about blood. It's about belief. In something larger, purer, steadier than any one person. Lieutenant Donovan embodies that belief. She bled for it. The Army doesn't salute perfection. It salutes persistence. When he finished, the reporters turned to her. Lieutenant, any words for your stepfather? She looked straight at the cameras, voice calm and unwavering. You tried to shame me, but the nation saluted instead. That clip went viral, heard again. But this time, she didn't feel invaded by it. This time, it wasn't scandal. It was testimony. The trial would come and go, the world would move on, but before it did, she had one last thing to do. Return the medal to the man who'd earned it and tell him she finally understood what service really meant. The trial came quickly. Headlines faded into court dockets, outrage turned into paperwork, and the story, Commissioning Day shooting, became just another folder in the nation's archive of brief scandals. But for Claire, the noise hadn't stopped. It had only gone inward. She attended the hearings in uniform, quiet and composed, seated in the back. She didn't testify. The prosecution didn't need her to. The footage was enough. Still, every time she saw him, Charles Donovan, led into the courtroom in shackles, she felt the same mix of pity and distance. He never looked at her. Not once. Her mother, Mary, sat beside her, head bowed like a woman praying at a funeral. The faint smell of the lavender perfume Claire remembered from childhood lingered. Something fragile trying to survive the air of judgment. When the verdict came, it was swift. Guilty on all counts. The gavel struck. The sound wasn't thunder this time. It was closure, blunt, brief, and merciful. Charles didn't plead, didn't shout, didn't weep. He simply nodded when the sentence was read, as if acknowledging a debt that had been due for years. Outside, cameras waited again. They always did. This time, Claire didn't stop for them, but General McAllister did. He stepped forward, medals glinting in the sunlight, and spoke to the press. Justice doesn't erase pain, but it reminds us that truth stands taller than violence. Lieutenant Donovan stood her ground with dignity, and today, so did the system that protects her. When he finished, he saluted her. Not for the cameras, not for the army, but for the scar beneath her sleeve that no medal could cover. The flashbulbs went off again, but the image that stuck wasn't chaos or blood this time. It was grace. Weeks later, when her arm finally healed enough for duty, Claire requested reassignment to the Honor Guard detail at Arlington National Cemetery. The request raised eyebrows. It was quiet work, ceremonial, nothing like field service. But McAllister approved it without hesitation. Sometimes, he said, the hardest missions are the silent ones. At Arlington, the days passed with measured precision. She folded flags, she stood watch, she saluted in the rain, in the cold, under the relentless symmetry of white headstones. Each motion was an act of control, a ritual that steadied the noise inside. On Sundays, she walked to her father's grave. Major Edward Shaw, Valor Beyond Duty. She'd touch the engraved letters with her fingertips, as if reading Braille carved by history itself. "I met General McAllister," she'd say softly. "He said you saved 12 men. I'm trying to save one. Myself." Then she'd place a single silver coin on the marble. Old soldier's habit. Respect between the living and the remembered. One afternoon, she was folding flags with Sergeant Ellis, a grizzled veteran with eyes like gravel and a voice like sandpaper. He watched her movements carefully. "You fold like a field officer," he said. "What's that mean?" "It means you've seen too much to waste motion." She smiled faintly. "My stepfather taught me that." He raised an eyebrow. "That the one who shot you?" "Yeah." He nodded slowly. "Then I guess even a bad teacher can teach discipline." The remark made her laugh, short, startled, honest. It was the first real laugh she'd had since the ceremony. That night, she sat alone in the barracks, the Medal of Valor on the desk beside her. Its gleam caught the lamplight, gold and cold and solemn. She picked it up, feeling its weight. It had been her father's once, then hers. And now it belonged somewhere higher than both. So she wrote a letter, deliberate, steady pen strokes, the way her father would have written orders. To the United States Army Archives, I wish to return the Medal of Valor awarded to Major Edward Shaw. This medal doesn't belong to one name. It belongs to every soldier who stood when family, fear, and fury told them to kneel. Please preserve it not as inheritance, but as example. Lieutenant Claire Donovan. When she finished, she sealed the envelope and placed it beside the medal box. Tomorrow, she'd deliver it in person. The next morning, McAllister met her at Arlington's main gates. He didn't ask why she'd called. He already knew. "You're returning it, aren't you?" "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly. "Your father once tried to do the same thing. Command refused it." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because some honors aren't given to individuals. They're given to bloodlines." She shook her head. "Then it's time someone changed that." McAllister studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "You sound just like him." Together, they walked to her father's grave. The air was still, heavy with that sacred quiet only Arlington knows, the kind where even the birds seem to listen. She placed the medal at the base of the stone. Her voice didn't tremble. "I didn't earn this to prove him wrong," she said softly. "I earned it to prove you right." McAllister saluted. Slowly. Deliberately. Behind them, a small group of recruits on a guided tour stopped. One by one, they followed his lead, hands rising in silent unity. The salute spread like a wave through the rows of white. Claire stood straight, eyes forward, tears steady but unashamed. She whispered, "Some blood ties you down. Others lift you into the light." As they left, McAllister asked quietly, "What will you do next, Lieutenant?" "Keep serving," she said, "but from now on my own name." That evening, back at the barracks, she watched the sunset burn against the flag outside the window. For the first time, The horizon didn't look like an end. It looked like breath. And somewhere in that quiet gold, she thought she heard her father's voice, low and proud. You stood your ground, kiddo. That's all any soldier needs to do. A year later, at Arlington's Memorial Day ceremony, the medal was represented. Not to her, but in her honor. And the man who placed it wasn't a general this time, but a mother who had finally found her own courage to stand beside her daughter. The sky over Arlington shimmered that May morning, white uniforms glinting in the sun, rows of folding chairs stretching across the manicured field. The annual Memorial Day ceremony was always solemn, but this year felt different. There was a hum beneath the quiet, a collective awareness that this story had already been written once in blood, and now was being rewritten in grace. Lieutenant Claire Donovan stood in formation near the stage, not as the focus, but as part of the guard detail, silent, upright, her posture impeccable. She'd requested not to speak, not to be acknowledged, but the Army, being what it was, had other plans. General Robert McAllister, now recently promoted to Deputy Chief of Staff, stepped to the podium. The crowd rose to its feet automatically, cameras poised. "Before we begin," he said, his voice carrying across the stone and air, "we honor not just the fallen, but those who stand through fire and shame, and still salute the flag that others tried to stain." He turned slightly. "Lieutenant Donovan, front and center." A ripple went through the audience. Claire's jaw tightened. She hadn't expected this. Still, her boots moved on instinct. She marched to the platform, heels clicking in measured rhythm, every step echoing through the rows of gravestones. At the edge of the stage, McAllister extended a small black box. Inside was the Medal of Valor, her father's medal, gleaming once more, restored and reframed in a new plaque. The inscription read, "For courage shown beyond blood." But he didn't hand it to her. He stepped aside. Her mother, Mary, walked forward. The crowd gasped softly. Many recognized her from the televised trial, the weeping figure in the courtroom gallery. Now she was composed, standing tall, hands steady. The woman who had once chosen silence was about to speak. McAllister said quietly, "Mrs. Donovan, you may present it." Mary turned to her daughter. "I was there the day you were shot," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "And for years before that, I watched a man shrink our world with his bitterness. But you," she swallowed, "you didn't just survive him. You forgave him. And in doing so, you saved me too." She placed the medal in Claire's hands. "It doesn't belong to me," Claire said softly. "It belongs to him." Mary shook her head. "Not anymore. He earned it once. You kept it alive." A hush swept through the audience. The sunlight flared briefly off the medal's surface, scattering gold across their faces. From the second row, the press recorded everything: the tears, the salute, the unmistakable unity of two women who had walked through fire and come out whole. But the real reaction wasn't captured on film. It happened behind them, among the recruits standing in formation, every one of them without order, lifting their right hand in salute. One by one, the crowd followed. Veterans, civilians, officers, 300 people standing in reverent silence. It wasn't spectacle this time. It was solidarity. McAllister's voice broke through again, low and grave. "Lieutenant Donovan taught this nation something its medals can't. That family ends where honor begins, and begins again in courage." Then he saluted. Slow, deliberate. The crowd followed once more, a living wave of respect that swept across the cemetery. Claire didn't move for a moment. Then, still holding the medal, she raised her arm in return. The band began to play softly, not the full anthem, but a single trumpet line. Taps, curling through the air like prayer. Her vision blurred, but her stance held. Her father would have expected nothing less. When the ceremony ended, the crowds dispersed slowly. McAllister approached her, removing his cap. "You did well, Lieutenant." "I didn't do anything," she said. "I just stood still." He smiled. "That's sometimes the hardest thing to do." She looked at the medal again, the light catching its edge. "It feels heavier than before." "That's because it's finally real," he said. After the speeches, when the field was almost empty, she found her mother standing by her father's grave again. The wind was stronger now, snapping the flags at every headstone like whispered applause. Her mother traced the name carved in granite. He would have been proud. Claire placed the medal on the stone. He already was. They stood together in silence, the kind that wasn't awkward or broken, the kind that fills the air after a long war when the guns finally stop. Her mother spoke quietly. You know, when he died, I thought bravery was about never crying. I was wrong. It's about never hiding. Claire smiled faintly. You learned faster than most generals? Mary laughed. A small, shaking laugh, but free. Maybe I finally had the right teacher. Right. The sky began to shift, pale blue giving way to amber. The last trumpet call echoed across the rows, long and low, fading into the wind. Claire took one final look at her father's grave, the metal gleaming softly on the stone. Then she turned to her mother and said, "Let's go home." They walked back through the field, side by side, step for step, the wind carrying the faint sound of the trumpet's final note. Behind them, the flag rose and caught the evening light, holding it like a secret. Add immediately after the salute scene, before, when the ceremony ended. Respect doesn't arrive with applause. It lands when silence stands. The camera would linger on the still field, the wind tugging at the edges of uniforms, sound fading until all that's left is breath and sunlight. A year later, she'd be back at that same field. Not in uniform this time, but as a speaker, reminding a new generation that family isn't who gives you your name. It's who lets you keep it. 1 year later, the air over Arlington carried that same quiet weight, the kind that feels less like grief and more like memory that refuses to fade. The grass was still cut with military precision. The flag still rippled like living breath. But this time, Lieutenant Claire Donovan walked the grounds without uniform or salutes. She wasn't there for ceremony. She was there for reflection. A dozen new cadets stood in rows nearby, crisp blues gleaming, nerves buzzing. They were waiting for the guest speaker the Army had invited to close the season's commissioning program. None of them expected the woman who'd once bled on her own commissioning stage to be the one who walked to the podium. When she stepped up, some recognized her. Others only knew the legend. The officer shot by her stepfather, who stood her ground. The air seemed to still as she adjusted the microphone. I was supposed to talk to you about service, she began, voice calm, steady. But that's not what kept me standing when my world fell apart. So instead, I'll talk about silence. The crowd shifted, puzzled, attentive. My father used to say silence was where honor learns to breathe. My stepfather thought silence was control. My mother used silence to survive. And me? She paused, letting the words find their weight. I learned silence can be two things, a weapon or a prayer. You decide which. She looked over the cadets, young faces caught between fear and hope, uniforms too new to understand what they carried. Someday, she said, you'll bleed for something you didn't start. A mission, a mistake, a family name. When that happens, remember, the blood doesn't make you weaker. It proves you're still human enough to care. A breeze rolled through the crowd. A flag snapped once in salute. The moment stretched, not dramatic, not rehearsed, just quietly sacred. I was raised by a man who thought power made him worthy, she continued, and by another man who died proving service did. You'll meet both kinds out there, the ones who shout their loyalty and the ones who live it. Choose the second. Every time. Her voice softened. Because in the end, the Army can give you medals, titles, ceremonies, but the only thing that will matter, truly matter, is if you can look at your reflection after the storm and still recognize the person saluting back. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They stood, every single one of them, and saluted in silence. And that silence said more than any anthem ever could. After the ceremony, a young woman approached, a new second lieutenant, barely 22. Her hands trembled as she held out her cap for signing. Ma'am, she said softly, my father told me your story when I was still in ROTC. He said courage isn't loud. It's what stands after pride falls. Claire smiled. Your father was right. He was a sergeant, the girl said. He didn't make it home. Claire's voice gentled. Then he never left you. You're standing. That's all he'd ask. The cadet blinked back tears, saluted, and walked away. her spine straight, her steps deliberate. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Claire found herself wandering toward the far end of the cemetery, to a grave she hadn't visited in months. The marker was smaller, newer. Charles Donovan, 1949 to 2024. At last he stood still. Her mother had chosen the epitaph. It wasn't forgiveness, it was honesty. Claire stood there for a long while, the sound of distant trumpets carrying on the wind. "I don't know if you'd understand this," she murmured, "but I'm not angry anymore." The wind shifted. The nearby flags fluttered like answering breaths. "You tried to break something that wasn't yours," she continued softly. "But the truth is, you didn't make me, and you couldn't unmake me." She touched the edge of the stone. "I hope, wherever you are, you finally found the silence that didn't hurt." Then she turned and walked toward her father's grave. At Edward Shaw's resting place, sunlight glinted on the plaque McAllister had ordered a year earlier. "For courage shone beyond blood." Beside it lay the Medal of Valor, encased now in a clear display, part of a permanent memorial to the fallen and the steadfast. She traced the letters of his name with her finger, the stone warm from the afternoon sun. "I gave it back, Dad," she whispered, "because honor doesn't need to be worn. It just needs to be lived." She stood at attention, gave one slow, perfect salute, and held it until the breeze lifted her hair and carried the moment away. When she left the cemetery, she didn't look back. Her mother waited at the gates holding 2 cups of coffee. "How'd it go?" Mary asked. "Better than my first ceremony," Claire said, smiling. Mary laughed, a soft, weary sound that still had hope in it. "You think you'll ever stop serving?" Claire looked toward the horizon, the sun melting into the gold edge of the day, the world wide and waiting. "No," she said, "because service isn't duty anymore. It's legacy." They stood together as the last light caught the rows of white stones, turning them gold for a brief, impossible moment, like every story of sacrifice had been caught in one shared breath. Some blood ties you down, others lift you into the light. Family ends where honor begins, and begins again in those who stand after the storm. The music would swell, slow brass, one final trumpet line fading into silence. Then the flag fills the frame, waving against a sky that's no longer tragic, just endless. If you've ever had to fight for respect where love should have been, this story is yours. Subscribe for more cinematic tales of truth, dignity, and the quiet kind of courage that never needs applause. Because honor isn't loud, it's what's left when the shouting ends. My stepfather fired at my commissioning until the general's salute changed everything I bled. On my graduation stage, but respect didn't arrive with applause, only silent salute trial. After gunfire, my family broke, then the army taught me what honor means. A ceremony turned chaos. The medal was meant for my father, but the real legacy was mine. He tried to shame me on the parade field, but the nation watched me stand tall, bleeding.